Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We may still have a few more folks join us this morning, but thank you for making time to be with me this morning and also with Liz Schaller. I'm Nicole Gaines. I am the NIMAC Project Director, and I'm joined this morning with Liz, who is the NIMAC Manager. And today we're going to be talking about working in the NIMAC system and providing some basics in terms of how publishers work with the NIMAC. And so to get into a little more detail about what we'll be covering this morning is there are actually two sections, and we're going to be covering some information in a PowerPoint presentation to talk about some background on the NIMAC, how publishers use their accounts, and a little bit of information about the file review process. And then we're going to switch over to a live demo where I'm going to show you a bit about working with your account and the different functions and features that are available there. Before we dive in, though, I just wanted to let folks know to mark your calendar if you are a publisher user or a conversion vendor who is more involved with the technical side of preparing and submitting NIMAS files to the repository. We invite you to join us for the second part of this two-part series, which will be more focused on creating NIMAS files, file validation, delivering files to the NIMAC, a little bit more into the nuts and bolts. And those will be offered on Monday, June 20th, and then it will be repeated again on Wednesday, June 22nd, to try to capture as many folks as we can. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and she's going to cover some information about the basics of the NIMAC. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So like Nicole said, I'm going to go through kind of some background of the NIMAC project and the NIMAS specification, and then get in a little bit to some more recent developments with the NIMAC and some ongoing research that we're doing with an independent researcher. So let's go ahead and get started with the background information. So the NIMAC project was created by IDEA 2004, and we are the National Source File Repository for K-12 textbooks and core instructional materials. We make NIMAS files, which we'll get into in a little bit, available for use in producing accessible formats for K-12 instructional materials. Files in the NIMAC are not distributed directly to students. This is just a source production file. The NIMAC has been in continuous operation since it opened in December of 2006. And so states and districts have been able to require NIMAS in their textbook contracts since July of 2006. And we're happy to say that to date, we've received over 69,000 file sets from 160 publishers. We're also happy to report that over 46,000 files have been downloaded for use in producing accessible formats for students with disabilities. So how do states work with the NIMAC? IDEA does not require that states work with the NIMAC, but all 50 states, as well as the 6 eligible territories and the Department of Defense, have chosen to do so. This kind of means 3 things for states that coordinate with the NIMAC. They can require NIMAS from publishers in their textbook adoption contracts. They agree to abide by the eligibility requirements of IDEA, which we'll talk about in a little bit here, and as well as the copyright law and use of NIMAS files. And then thirdly, they designate and manage a small number of authorized users for their state. So the basic structure with the state coordinator means that the access to the NIMAC is very centralized. Each state that coordinates names a NIMAC state coordinator at the State Department of Education. And this is the individual who's responsible for designating and managing the authorized users who have access to the repository and can download files. Those authorized users, there are typically 5 or less for a state or territory. They may also assign files for download to registered accessible media producers working on behalf of the state. But those accessible media producers do not have access to download any file in the repository, only files that are assigned to them by authorized users. So let's talk a little bit about eligibility for NIMAS. IDEA 2004 defines the eligibility requirements for receiving materials produced from NIMAS. These materials can only go to elementary and secondary school students who have 1, a qualifying disability per the eligibility guidelines of the National Library Service, and 2, an IEP. The NIMAC is not involved in determining eligibility for individual students. That is a responsibility that falls to the student's school district. All right, so we've said NIMAS a few times. So what does this mean? What is the NIMAS specification? So NIMAS stands for the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard. This is an XML-based source file format that is based on the DAISY standard. And it is specifically designed for use in producing formats such as Braille, DAISY, EPUB, and large print. It is not intended for distribution directly to students, and NIMAS is the only format that the NIMAC receives in the repository. So as a format that is defined in IDEA 2004, the specification itself can only be updated through legislative or regulatory action. The NIMAC itself is not able to make changes to the spec or broaden the formats we can receive. However, when IDEA 2004 is reauthorized, and it's many years behind schedule for this, there will be an opportunity at that time to make changes. So what materials are within scope for the NIMAC? Under IDEA, the NIMAC is to receive printed textbooks and related printed core materials that are written and published primarily for use in elementary school and secondary school instruction and required by a state education agency or local education agency for use by students in the classroom. Neither OSEP nor the NIMAC imposes a definition of core. So the NIMAC accepts a range of student-facing materials. These can include textbooks, workbooks, supplementary readers, as well as we do have some ancillary materials like Blackline Masters that do not contain the teacher-facing material. So what is exempt for the NIMAC? Materials that the NIMAC does not generally receive include trade books, college textbooks, reference books, materials published before 2006, and teacher's editions or ancillaries for the exclusive use of the teacher. So we can receive the student-facing pages of ancillary materials, but not the teacher content. Okay, so this was the kind of the foundational information for the NIMAC for a very long time, but in May 2020 we did have a slight change in scope. The U.S. Department of Education published a notice of interpretation clarifying that the definition of print instructional materials in IDEA includes digital instructional materials as well. So we can now accept files for digital materials if the content can be supplied in NIMAS format, and that is a big if. The NIMAS file format has not changed. I want to emphasize that it has not changed. So what can we accept? Mainly digital materials that are composed of static text and images, and which have a unique ISBN, are the materials that can be converted into NIMAS. So a lot of those digital products that students are using in the classroom that are more interactive, like games or software, those are not suitable for NIMAS. And the notice of interpretation also indicates that digital materials that meet established accessibility standards, in this case, WCAG 2.0 AA, are exempt from NIMAS. We do have an FAQ on our website if you have any questions at all, you want to read more about it, and then also at any time, please email us at nimac@aph.org if you have any questions.
And just to chime in on that, one of the other things I like to mention is that, we talked about how the NIMAS in the IDEA legislation, the mechanism that's provided there for requiring NIMAS is the printed book adoption contract or purchase agreement, and that is the same for the digital materials. So far, the NIMAC has actually received very few NIMAS files for digital materials, and so I believe part of this, has to do with states and districts still trying to get a handle themselves on what, how to work with digital materials in terms of requiring that they meet an accessibility benchmark or incorporating some other kind of requirement. So in terms of our experience, because it really is hinged to that purchase agreement, we haven't seen a lot of these materials yet.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah. So, and so kind of going along these lines with the what Nicole was saying about not receiving a lot of digital instructional materials, we were fortunate enough to be able to contract with an independent researcher this year, Dr. Penny Rosenblum, to investigate the state of accessibility of K-12 digital instructional materials, as well as to explore the technical assistance needs around providing NIMAS for these materials when it is appropriate. And so Dr. Rosenblum has been speaking with teachers of the visually impaired, special education teachers, procurement folks in states and districts, ex officio trustees of the American Printing House, various user groups, including publishers. And so if you haven't already, we would love to hear from you for this study. If you are willing to participate in a 1-hour interview or focus group, please contact us at nimac@aph.org and we will get you connected with her. All right, I'm just going to touch on a couple more things before I hand it back over to Nicole. And one of the important things is that, as we talked about earlier, the mechanism to require NIMAS is the textbook contract. But we know that that this doesn't happen every single time. There are almost 14,000 school districts in the United States. And so this language does not always make it into those district contracts. And in instances like that, when a user reaches out to us because they need to produce an accessible format for a student and they're not finding the material that they need in the NIMAC, we will reach out to the publisher to request a file when there is need for that Braille or other accessible format for an eligible student. And we really appreciate publishers' assistance and support of students in response to these requests. We get great support in response to these requests, and we're continually appreciative of that. All right, and then finally, if you are someone who helps your customers locate accessible formats for your materials, we highly recommend that you point them in the direction of the LUI database of accessible materials. This is your best place to send folks. It is a listing of accessible formats, including Braille, that have been produced and are available for purchase in the United States. And we also are happy to help your customers locate materials. So please do, you can also send people to us, and we're happy to help as well. And it looks like Nicole just popped that link in the chat. If you haven't been to LUI lately, it may look a little different for you today. And if you want to talk a little bit about that, Nicole, otherwise I'll hand it over to Nicole in the next part of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Liz. And yeah, and so we actually just launched a newly redesigned LUI database today. So if you go to the LUI link, you will see our new bright and shiny website. It actually is a great improvement. The old site had been in place for about 10 or 12 years, and so we were really looking forward to having a site with a better search and just a nicer interface. And so we do encourage you to take a look. One of the things that that we did not mention earlier is that this PowerPoint will be available to folks. We will post it on the website. If you're interested, we are also more than happy to email it to you if you're interested in that. And we will also be archiving the presentation on the NIMAC website. if you are interested in that. So before we move on, I'm going to kind of, again, get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts and talk about the publisher accounts and the file review process. But before we move on to that, are there any questions that anyone would like to ask about the information that has been covered so far? And you're welcome to enter the question in the chat, or if you have a microphone, you're welcome to ask a question there. I'm not seeing anything come through, so we'll also have time for questions at the end. So you're also welcome to ask then. So I'm going to move ahead and talk a little bit more about the way that publishers work with their accounts and what this means. Publisher accounts are made available free of charge to publishers who work with the NIMAC. There's no cost whatsoever in terms of actually submitting files to the NIMAC, managing your account, and that kind of thing. So basically, we provide these accounts, and they provide a range of functions that are available to you. One of them is that you are able to upload smaller files directly to the NIMAC. If you are a publisher that works with a smaller number of files, you may not be interested in having an FTP delivery process. That's the other option, and we'll talk more in depth about that in the second part of the series. But the portal itself, the online system, does allow for upload of smaller files directly through your account. You can also view, search, or download your own inventory at any time as a publisher. You can export inventory reports. You can also create additional user accounts, either for conversion vendors or for other folks at your company. You can download the NIMAC validation wizard. And you can also generate correctly formatted OPF metadata using an optional system tool to create OPF metadata from an Excel sheet. So I'll be talking a little in more depth about these various features. So before I get into that, though, I do want to talk just basically about the file review and certification process. So basically, in order for a file to be accepted into the NIMAC, there's basically a two-step process. The first one is an automated file validation, which makes the NIMAC validation wizard really important in terms of ensuring that your files can pass that project, or excuse me, pass that process before you actually attempt to upload them or send them by FTP. And then the second is that there's a manual quality check of the files and metadata by the NIMAC staff. Once both of those steps have been completed and the files are accepted into the NIMAC, the publisher primary user, or who we usually call the super user, will receive an email with a digital certificate number. This number can sometimes be important to folks, as it's a way for you to verify to customers that you have supplied the NIMAS in accordance to the adoption contract or the purchase agreement. That's your verification that this step has happened. As an aside, you can also add up to 3 additional email addresses to receive those notifications if that is of interest to you. Just email us, again, nimac@aph.org if you're interested in that. We'd be happy to help you with that. When I get into the demo portion, I will actually also show you, you continue to have access to that information in your account at any time. So if for whatever reason, you deleted the email or whatever, you always continue to have access to your certificate numbers in your certified inventory in the system. And it will be present both in the full metadata record, or if you export a report, which I'll also show you in just a bit, you will be able to see it there as well. So in terms of the file review checks that we do, again, metadata is really important for your files because it's the way that your customers are going to find the files that they need to produce the Braille or other accessible formats. So the metadata review for us is pretty important. We want to ensure that the metadata is correct and that it's complete. We also have involved with this process a certain number of additional checks to the XML. We look for some tagging of some common structures like the table of contents and the glossary, where we know that correctly tagging those can have an impact on the accessible format that's produced and the usability of the file. We also look for some other required tags For example, page number tags, also really important for navigation in the accessible format. And we will also, if there's alt text present, we will take a look at the alt text. But it's really important to note that we don't receive the printed books and we don't do a page by page comparison to evaluate, this table is, it does match. There is a table on page 264 of the book. It's just not that kind of in-depth review, but there are some things that we look for, and we may provide feedback to you if there are some issues with some of that XML tagging. Another thing with regard to the file review process is that NIMAC staff can and routinely do make minor metadata corrections in the system without requiring that files be resubmitted. And this is actually, it's a plus for us, it's a plus for publishers and conversion vendors, that we can make those kinds of minor changes without having to require that files be sent to us with corrections. However, if a file does have a problem with the XML or the PDF file, for example, if the PDF is incomplete, it doesn't include all of the required metadata for us to verify what the material is, we will send a detailed feedback email so that the file can be corrected and resubmitted as quickly as possible. So the general procedure here is that we can tell from the audit trail in the system who uploaded the file or who submitted the file by batch. So we can basically zero in and send that feedback to the person who delivered or uploaded the file. If you're a publisher who prefers to be copied on that, if you have a vendor who generally takes care of that, but you would like to be looped in on that, we're also more than happy to copy the publisher on those emails as well. Another important piece here is just the file review timeline. And as I think Liz mentioned, we have about 160 publishers that have submitted files to us to date. And what this means is that there's a lot of fluctuation and variability in terms of the number of files that we may have in the review queue at any given time. It can, and so this basically, the timeline for review is just very, very variable. So it could be that if you submit your files and it happens to be a period of very light submissions, we might actually be able to certify your files the same day that you upload them. However, if you submit a delivery of 500 files and 2 other publishers also submitted 500 files that same week, we may be looking at a longer timeline, a week or 2, and in some cases, possibly longer. So the basic thing here is just if you have a certification deadline, if you're trying to help out a customer and get some files by a particular time, let us know at the time that you submit the files, and we're we're happy to try and work with you on that. We do encourage you, if you have a strict deadline, to submit the files at least 2 weeks in advance. And this can be important because if there are any issues, if there are any tagging problems that we do have to go back to the vendor and say, we really need for you to correct A, B, or C, they'll have some time. There'll be a little bit of a buffer in there for them to make those corrections and for you to still meet the deadline with your customer. So although in general, we certify the materials in the order that they're received, we're happy to prioritize when there is a deadline. So just let us know. So this is just the NIMAC homepage. And I mentioned earlier that this webinar and the PowerPoint will be archived here. The website address is nimac.us, and this is, you can actually get to the NIMAC online system from here. You'll see that there's like a login button here, so you can get to that. You can also get to the public search here, but I wanted to mostly just accentuate here that there is a specific page here for publishers and conversion vendors, and this is where you can find a lot of different resources for you to help in preparing and submitting NIMAS files. So encourage you to take a look. If you've not ever been to the NIMAC website, encourage you to take a look there and see the resources that are available to you. So now I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and show you a live demo. And again, I'm just going to stop just briefly before we transition to that and just check. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask. So, okay, I don't see any questions at this point. So I'm going to move along. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to switch screens here. And Liz, if you could let me know and verify that you are now seeing the landing page for a NIMAC publisher account.
We are, yes.
Yay, great. Okay, so so this part is going to be, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a tour here. If you are a publisher or a vendor who has worked with the NIMAC and you have an account, this will look very familiar to you because when you log in, this is what your landing page is going to be. It's always going to be your NIMAC inventory. And what you basically see here, this is actually very similar to what an authorized user sees when they log in. They're going to see the inventory, not just your inventory, but the complete inventory. They're going to have a search box, and then they're going to have their menu items in terms of different functions that they can do. So in terms of the basic layout up in the upper right, that's really where you're going to see a lot of your optional tools and ways of working in the system. And so we're just going to kind of walk through what these different options are. And the first one that I'm going to take you to is user information. And this is a place where you can go. If you click on my account, oops, I timed out. Let's go back. If you go to my account, this is basically, this is a test account, so it doesn't show you a whole lot of information here. But one of the things that's important here is that you don't have the option of actually changing your information and your contact information. We ask for folks to send those changes to us, and we're happy to help you with that. So if you have any changes that are to your general information, let us know, and we're happy to do that. One thing that you can do from this screen is you can change your password if you want to do that. The other option from this menu item is your sub-users, and that's an option that's usually of more interest to folks because this is where you're going to go if you need to create an account for someone else at your company or for a conversion vendor. So we're going to talk a little bit about that now. Basically, if you go to this screen, you're going to see all of the users for your company that currently are in place. So what I see here is I created a sample vendor account here. And for any active user that you have, under actions, you can edit the name or the email address of a sub-user, or you can delete an account from here. But what I'm going to show you now is how to add a user, and it's actually very simple. You only need to know the person's first name, last name, and their email address. And once you create the account and save the changes, then that person will automatically be emailed a user ID and a password. The most important piece here, though, is not the contact information, but the user role. What you'll notice here under user role is there are two options. One of them says publisher, the other one says vendor. The difference here is that if you have a conversion vendor who's working with your inventory, they're uploading files for you, the vendor role is the appropriate role for that. It gives the vendor all of the access to your account that they need in order to submit files or resubmit files. Whereas the publisher role provides a few other options that are not available to the vendor. Specifically, if you choose a publisher role for the account, the user will be able to download inventory, they'll be able to run the download report, and they will be able to add additional users. So again, you just that is a role for somebody that you really want to have to provide a little additional access to your account. So that is creating users. Any questions about that? Don't think so. Okay, great. So One of the other things that I like to mention is that if you ever want to go back to your landing page, if you are working somewhere in your account, you can always just click on the logo in the upper left-hand corner, and that will take you back to your inventory landing page. And so that's where we can get back to that. So the next thing that I'm going to show you here is just on the bottom line here, these are the options here. The add new content I've mentioned, I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail in just a few moments. But first I want to talk about a couple of options that you may or may not have used in the past, may not be aware of. And I'm going to start with reports. This is an optional feature where you can actually generate a report by NIMAC users if you're interested. How many different states have downloaded my files, or users in different states, or how many times. This is just where you can go and do that. This is, again, this is a report for those downloads by NIMAC users. Another tab here is the resources tab, and this is where you will go. I mentioned earlier the importance of the NIMAC validation wizard. This is where you go to download that tool. This is a free tool. It's a standalone tool for you to provide that automated validation of your files before you try and submit them to the NIMAC. We currently have a Windows version available of this. We've been working diligently on a Mac version, which we hope to post to this same spot very soon. And we will be sending out an announcement once that is available. The other thing that's available from this screen here is the NIMAC metadata template. And what this is actually used for is it's used in conjunction with the Transform Excel to OPF tool. And I'm going to just take a moment to talk about that optional tool. This is a way that you can produce correctly formatted and complete OPF metadata by using the specifically prescribed template that you can download from the resources tab. And the way that this works basically is that you fill out the Excel sheet, and then once you choose the file, and actually I have one that that I filled in yesterday, and it's just very, very simple. It's just once you click convert to OPF, it will give you a system confirmation, and then basically what it's going to do then is it is going to it will actually email you a zip file, and I'm going to show you what that zip file looks like, and it's instantaneous. It's really, really quick. In that zip file, what you're going to see is that it's going to provide you the OPF metadata for, oops, not sure what that message means. It's going to send you the OPF metadata for every line that you included in the Excel sheet. So in this case, I only included one line. And what you see here is exactly what was provided. So basically all of the metadata that was provided in the spreadsheet is correctly tagged, it's correctly formatted, and it's all there. And so again, this is an optional tool. If it's useful in your conversion process, we encourage you to use it. It can just really, if it works for you, it can be very advantageous. And so of course, this isn't the complete OPF. You still have to put your manifest at the bottom. You still have to include the spine information, but it can really be a great shortcut in terms of providing that metadata. So if you haven't ever taken a look at it or given it a try, we encourage you to give it a look. So that's that particular tool there. The other thing that I wanted to talk about next is just basically, again, right now we are back at our inventory screen, and I just wanted to note that you will see a search box here at the top. Once you're in your inventory, this particular test account only has 7 records in it, so that's not too difficult to just kind of page through. If you have a lot of inventory, though, you do have the option. You can search by ISBN or identifier, and you can also use the same filters. You'll see a range of filters over here to the left. in order to zero in on specific inventory that you want to look at. One thing that I want to point out here is the very first filter is status, and this can be an important one for you if you're looking at your inventory and you're wondering, where is a file in the review process, for example. There are three basic statuses that may apply to your inventory. The first one is certified. That means that those materials have been accepted into the NIMAC. Uncertified means that those materials are in the review queue. And then if you see any items that say stalled, those are items that we were not able to certify. We've provided feedback on some corrections that are needed, and we're waiting for those files to be resubmitted. So those are the three statuses in terms of the materials that you have in your inventory. Going down and looking at the actual records, I want to just kind of focus a little bit on some of the options that you have for your inventory that's already in the system. I'm going to actually show you in a moment how to add new content if you have a file that you wanted to upload through the system. But just looking at materials that are already there, you will see if you are a publisher user, and again, this particular test account is a publisher user, and you can view your title details. If you click that, you will see the complete metadata for the record. You can also edit the metadata, and what that simply means is that if it is an uncertified or a stalled file, you can actually go in and without actually uploading a new zip file, you can make a change to just the metadata, and that will be saved to the system and to the OPF of the file that is in the inventory. Replace zip file, this is the option that you're going to use if you have received some feedback for a file that was uploaded and you need to make a correction. If you were to want to replace that file in the system, replace zip file is the option that you're going to use for that. It can be a little bit confusing because add new content here, that's another option for uploading content, but that is only for files that are not already in the system. If you do try to use that option and the ISBN or the identifier is already in the system will let you know. And that's just simply to prevent duplicate uploads of the same file. So the other option here is add to my downloads. As I mentioned, you do have the option to download your own inventory at any time if you are a publisher user, if you're a super user. One caveat that I will say about that is that we do have the same watermarking and fingerprinting, and this is the DRM that we use in the system for any file that is downloaded. So if you download a file from the system, it will have that fingerprinting and watermarking that identifies your account as having downloaded the file. And so if you need a clean file to resubmit, or if you're needing to rework a file that's in inventory and you want to resubmit it, please let us know. We're happy to get you a clean, unwatermarked file because we just don't want a watermarked file to be re-uploaded to the inventory. So, and actually the new validation wizard will prevent that from happening, but just as an aside, we'd like for folks to know about that. Another thing that I'll just make a note of is that if we actually go to a file that is in the certified inventory, we do have one here, you'll notice here that you have fewer options here and that you're not actually able to edit the metadata or replace the zip file once a file is in certified inventory. And again, that's simply to prevent any inadvertent changes to the file after it's been accepted into the NIMAC. So if you need to resubmit a certified file, no problem. Just let us know and we're happy to move that into the stalled inventory for you so that you can make any changes or re-upload the file as you need to. So the last thing that I want to cover this morning is I want to talk about add new content. And again, this is where you're going to go if you want to add a new file directly to the system. The manual upload process can accept a file that's up to 300 megabytes in size, but we tend to recommend that if they're over 200 that you just use the batch delivery process. And again, we'll be talking more in detail about that in the second webinar. But if you have a smaller file, it's a very simple process to upload a file, and I have a test file here that I'm going to walk through this and show you how it works. So once I've navigated to the file and I click the upload, what you'll notice here is that the time that it takes for this particular part of the process to complete depends on the size of the file, because what's actually happening initially is that it's going through that automated validation process. I did not introduce any validation errors to this particular file, so because I didn't want it to hang up. But if you were to have a validation issue, you would get the information on that particular screen. It would stop the upload process and provide you with the output letting you know what changes needed to be made before you could successfully upload the file. So what's going to happen next after that process, if your validation happens, it's going to actually show you the metadata that was provided in the OPF, because this will automatically be extracted to create the record in the system. And so that's basically how we get those records into the system. It's pulled directly from that OPF. And you actually have an opportunity at this point to make any changes to the metadata. If there's a second ISBN that you didn't add to the OPF, for example, you could add it at this point. It would be saved to the record and it would be saved to the OPF. So this is just kind of another place where you can make some changes before you actually save the file. If you like the metadata, it's all good. Then you just click save. And I'm hoping that this will actually save. And then at that point, what's going to happen is that the record will, the file will be saved to your inventory, and you will see it in your, there we go. You will see it in your inventory immediately. And I'm actually going to sort this by update date most recent. And we can see that. So there's the file that I just uploaded to the system. It shows the status of uncertified. And there it is. And the other thing is that you don't have to provide us any further notification. We are automatically aware when files are put in uncertified, and they automatically will go into the review queue. So you are good at that point. Your file will be reviewed, and then once it's certified, you will get that certification email. Another thing that I wanted to note while we're here at this inventory page is you will notice that there is an export button. Sometimes this can be really helpful for folks if you are needing to ever generate a report of your own inventory. You can do this at any time using that export button. And you can do this on your full inventory. If you are just at your inventory landing page and you click that button, you will get a report of your complete inventory. If you are if you've done a search, if you just want a specific subset of your inventory in that report, you can do any search, apply any filters, hit that export, and create your own custom report at any time. It can just be a really handy thing. Going back again to the complete metadata record, I had mentioned to you before that your certificate numbers were always available to you. And again, you will see them if you click that export and your report includes certified files. And going to that record that I just, that file that I just, well, actually, I certified it yesterday, but this is the certified file. And so I want to just show you where this certificate number is. So basically, if you are looking at any record in the system for a certified file, it's going to be the last line in your full record. So, and again, if we go back to the inventory, all you have to do to view that, you can either click the title or you can click view title details. Both of those will take you to the full record where you can see that certificate number. And again, it will also be a part of any report when you click that export button. So that is pretty much it for what I wanted to cover today. The other option here, we do have a few more minutes. So I will just go ahead and walk through the downloads. If you are ever in a position where you want to download your inventory, a possible use case for this, it doesn't come up very often, but a few times over the years it has happened that a publisher has wanted to make a NIMAS file available to, for example, a Braille producer. If you have customers in Canada, for example, and someone needs Braille in Canada and you want to provide them a NIMAS file to do that, that would be a scenario where you would be able to download your own inventory. You know, we wouldn't be able to supply that NIMAS file to that particular user. They would not qualify under IDEA to work directly with the NIMAC, but as the publisher, you have access to your inventory at any time. You can provide that file if you would like. So this is just walking, excuse me, walking through that process. There are some different options that you have here, and this just basically mirrors options that are available to NIMAC users. In some cases, an accessible media producer or an authorized user may want the images in the file. In other cases, they may not want the images or may not want them right away. So we actually have, we call it the XML download. That simply means that it excludes the images. And then for file verification purposes, we do provide that PDF only download. And again, we do not receive or distribute any PDFs for entire books. This is only going to be the PDF submitted with the file, which is generally the title page and copyright page. So when you submit your download request, basically you will get a confirmation that your request is being processed on the server side. And this is when, again, that DRM that I mentioned earlier, that fingerprinting and watermarking, that happens behind the scenes at this time. So basically the download process, there are kind of two pieces to it. The first is that you place that request, and then to complete the download, you may have noticed that up in the upper right, there is a My Downloads. When you go to that page, that's where you're actually going to see the completed download, where you can actually go in and download from this screen. And since we chose a very small download in this case, the download was available right away. If you had a really large file that had a lot of images, you might actually see under actions, you might actually see a status here of processing to show that it's not quite ready for download. One thing that I will notice about this is that this page is not dynamic. So if you actually see a status here that says that it's processing, you just want to refresh your browser periodically to see when that download is ready. Another thing that you have an option for here is you may see that there is a little checkbox up here at the top, send me an email notification. You can also just ask the system to let you know by email when your download is available. Okay. Are there any questions? Anybody have any questions about anything that we have covered or anything that we have not covered that we may cover next time? I'm happy to take any questions. Okay. Well, Liz, is there anything else that we want to mention before we close for this morning?
I don't think so. I will go ahead and put our email address in the chat because I know we mentioned it a few times. And just again, to reiterate, if you are a publisher who has not yet participated in our digital instructional materials research and you're interested, please do reach out to us and we can get you connected with her. This information I think is going to be really invaluable to a wide range of stakeholders, including us and you guys, hopefully too. So we'd really appreciate your participation.
Okay, well, with that, we just want to thank you guys again for joining us and hope that you will join us for the second session where we'll get more into tools for creating NIMAS, the NIMAS validation process, and a little bit more into the weeds on the technical side of NIMAS. So thank you very much again, and hope everybody has a great day.
Yeah, thank you all.